Is this the Dos Hilton? He asked. I mean, it doesn't look like what I booked over the internet. Oh, you don't want to stay there. It's full of gangsters selling cars and that sort of thing. You're staying with me. On the top floor is the Kerkomeno family apartment. Come on, we have 5 flights of stairs to climb. Welcome to Behind the Bottom Line. I'm James Schofield, the creator behind the quirky stories that keep you coming back to this podcast. And in Season 9, I have an exciting new project for you, a thriller called 7 Continents. We're now in Episode 5. Using her cover as a journalist, Macey Church is about to start interviewing Gilbert Villiers' fellow directors at the diamond mining company 7 Continents in London to see if one of them can be behind the threatening messages he's been receiving. Meanwhile, her colleague, Kirill Sokolov, is flying to Doshk, the capital of Kazbakistan and birthplace of Villiers' wife, Tatiana Kerkomenova, to investigate if the source of the problem could be there. But someone from his past is waiting for him at the airport, so fasten your seatbelts, it's about to get bumpy. Chapter 9 7 Continents. At 9:30 on Monday morning, Macey crossed Holborn Road into Waterhouse Square and found the enormous red brick Victorian Gothic building where 7 Continents had their headquarters. She checked the board listing the various companies that had offices there and made her way to the second floor. The entrance to the office was panelled in dark wood and exuded an air of solidity and respectability. To one side was the reception desk with 2 security personnel, while in the middle of the foyer, under a spotlight, was a black marble pillar, on top of which stood a bulletproof glass case. This housed, the sign told her, the now famous 100-carat long-kept diamond, the diamond which Villiers had discovered in his first job after university as a junior geologist working in Indonesia. Macey put her face up close to the glass and stared. It was slightly smaller than the diamond Marsden had found in Antarctica, but had a similar cut that refracted the incoming light into splinters of pure colour. It was very beautiful, and Macey was fascinated, almost forgetting what she was supposed to be doing there. "Morning, miss. Can I help you?" The large guard from the reception desk in the corner was standing at her elbow, looking at her suspiciously, as if he thought she might try to pocket the long-kept diamond. She straightened up. "Oh, I'm sorry. My name's Macey Church. I'm here to see Nancy Inovix." He left his assistant in charge and took her down corridors and upstairs to the other side of the courtyard. Although the office only occupied 2 floors of the building, there were a lot of people working there. The rooms that she looked into were much lighter and brighter than the foyer had led her to expect. The internal walls had been taken out, so there were large open-plan areas with modern furniture, plants, and little aquariums with brilliantly coloured fish that glittered almost as brightly as the diamond in the foyer. There didn't seem to be fixed desk spaces. Instead, she saw staff coming into work, collecting a little trolley and wheeling it around until they found somebody they wanted to sit next to or a place that had a nice view from the large windows which allowed the summer sunshine to pour into the building. The people were very mixed, so it felt like a cross-section of the hodgepodge of London itself. There was a pleasant atmosphere of people working hard, but without pressure or panic. She decided it must be a nice place to work. Nancy Inovix had her own office in one corner of the building, overlooking Holborn Circus. She was a small woman of about 60, with a dark bob parted down the middle. She wore an expensive suit in a dark purple linen material, and as Macey entered, she came round the desk to shake her hand. "Thank you for giving me some of your time, Mrs. Inovix. Hey, a fellow New Yorker! What part of the city do you come from?" "Upper West Side. What about you?" "The village, of course. How long have you been in exile?" It took 15 minutes to find out what people and places they had in common, and another 15 minutes discussing the merits or otherwise of the Giants, the Knicks and the Mets. But finally they came round to the ostensible topic for discussion. Gilbert Villiers and the biography Macey was supposed to be researching. "I would really appreciate your help, Nancy." They were on first name terms by now. "You were here in the company when he started. What was he like in the beginning? Do you have any good stories you could tell me?" "Well, he's very charming. All the secretaries adored him, still do. He'll hold the door for them to let them go in and out ahead of him, stuff like that. Of course, being from New York, I thought he was a phony. But I found out he can be tough when he wants to be. The way he dumped the previous CEO, that was pretty spectacular." "What happened?" Nancy paused to consider her next words carefully. "Okay, but what I tell you now is strictly off the record. Can't go in any book. But just so you get a feel for the guy and what he's like. The previous boss, Jack Bennett, was a real old-school Theory X manager. You know, people hate to work. They have to be bullied all the time, or else they'll just sit on their butts drinking coffee. Anyway, he would never, ever go on holiday. It drove us all nuts. He was always here checking up on everybody. Originally, Gilbert had been his golden boy, setting up all those big deals which helped expand the company. But after a few years, and when Gilbert was head of corporate strategy, you could see that Bennett was getting nervous about his power, and he started to pick on him in meetings all the time, and badmouth him behind his back to other board members. Gilbert could see what was happening, but didn't seem to let it bother him. Well, one day I come into the office and Bennett's secretary is freaking out because the guy's chair tipped over backwards and he's hit his head on the desk and blacked out. He's carted off to hospital and we're all standing there not knowing quite what to do. Gilbert turns around and says, "Okay, we're having an emergency board meeting now." We sit down and he says we need to have a financial audit done on the company straight away because of possible irregularities in reported figures. And he's got a team from one of the big 4 accounting companies on standby. They're in the company by that afternoon, and by the time Bennett is back in the office a week later, Gilbert has put together enough dirt on Bennett to force him to retire. What sort of dirt? You know the kind of thing. Bennett had set up accounts for payments to phony consultants, which were just covers for his own expenses. One of them turned out to be an escort girl, though in the invoices she was described as an executive stress consultant. But anyway, that's why Bennett never went on holiday. He knew the moment his back was turned, somebody might find out about his dirty little secrets. Why didn't it get into the papers? Gilbert offered Bennett the choice, either resign or go to jail. I tell you, that was one hell of a board meeting. Bennett was a big guy, over 2 meters, and he tried to intimidate us all. But Gilbert just sat there, looked him straight in the eye, and told him the security guard would escort him from the building. It was a great moment. And this was pretty amazing. Nancy had much more, to tell about Gilbert Villiers. She was a good storyteller, and Macey listened, fascinated. But it seemed unlikely that Nancy Inovix would herself do anything to harm her boss. She was clearly in love with him. Chapter 10. Doshk. The Tupolev of Air Kazbakistan flew over the red and brown mountains that surrounded the city of Doshk and circled the dusty airstrip, scaring the vultures that were finishing off the remains of a goat that had wandered onto the runway by mistake the day before and been hit by the daily plane from Moscow. The flight was full of noisy and cheerful Kazbakis, returning home from their jobs on Moscow building sites. Kirill's neighbours insisted on sharing their drinks with him, so in return Kirill gave them his British coins for their children's coin collection. By the time they finally landed, several empty vodka bottles were rolling backwards and forwards between the rows of seats, and Kirill had 2 new best friends. The queue to pass through the passport control was long and slow. One blonde, grumpy police officer, with a look of deep distrust on her face, was carefully checking the passports for the 160 passengers as they went through the baggage collection area. The queuing process was repeated to get through customs after they had collected their suitcases, although here the official's hair was dyed an unlikely red. Kirill observed some of the first-class passengers going through a separate door, manned by a smiling official, who discreetly accepted the banknotes they put in his hands as they went past. The result was that they did not have their suitcases opened and the contents carefully examined. If he came again, Kirill decided, he would have to investigate travelling first class. 3 hours after landing, he was finally out. He was heading towards the taxi stand when somebody called his name. "Kirill! Kirill! It's me!" A woman was waving at him. He glanced over his shoulder to see if she was looking at somebody else, but there was nobody there. He put down his suitcase as she walked with quick, long steps across the airport arrival hall towards him. She was wearing a blue polka-dot cotton dress with a red coral necklace that looked familiar. It was a present he had given to Tatiana's 15-year-old sister about 10 years ago. "Irina? Is it really you, Irina?" She laughed, and the loud, deep sound told Kirill this was Tatiana's sister. "Yes, of course. Don't you remember me? What took you so long? I've been waiting for ages. Don't tell me you didn't bribe the customs people to let you go through the VIP door. Really, Kirill, you've been away too long." She took his arm and led him to a battered Land Rover parked outside the airport entrance, asking hundreds of questions about her sister, nephew, and niece. She was like, and yet very unlike her sister. Tatiana was petite, and every movement, even when playing with her children, reminded you that this was a former ballerina. Irina was bigger, taller and darker. Her step was larger and her gestures more extravagant. But the long black hair, the eyes and the laugh were the same. "But how did you know I was coming?" he asked after a while, as they rattled past the trams down the avenue of glorious victory that led to the centre of Doshk. "Tatiana emailed me to say she had seen you and that you might be coming soon on business, and I should look after you. So I asked a friend of mine at the airport to tell me if your name appeared on the incoming passenger lists. Now, I'm curious. Why are you and Tanya suddenly in contact again, She looked at him sideways, one eyebrow raised like a question mark. Kirill grunted. This was one thing the adult Irina shared with the teenager he had known before. She was very direct. "I know what you're thinking, Irina, but it's not like that. Yes, Tanya wants help, but it's not her that's in trouble, it's her husband. He's my client." He told her what had happened so far, and how he hoped to find out what the connection was between 7 continents and Kazbakistan. Irina listened and concentrated on steering her way through the mixture of battered old Soviet-era cars and trucks and sleek modern Mercedes and off-road vehicles that surrounded them. She pressed the horn hard as one swerved suddenly in front of her. "Idiot!" she yelled, and tapped the side of her head. Kirill hoped the other driver was not too insulted. He looked like one of the dubious characters he had seen taking the VIP exit at the airport, and he suspected they didn't settle arguments with a civilized discussion over a cup of tea. "I hate these Mercedes cars. They're mostly stolen. Gangs steal them in Germany and Austria, drive them over here and sell them." They were now bumping along narrow cobbled streets, which had originally been built in the 18th century and designed for people and horses, and didn't see why they should adapt themselves to large, powerful cars. The pavements were crowded with people buying from the food shops and stalls that were set into the ground floor of the buildings in the centre of the city. Finally she braked and parked in a smaller space than Kirill would have thought possible, opposite the entrance to the courtyard of a grand but crumbling palace. "Here we are," she said, and bounced out of the car, taking some bags of shopping with her from the back seat. Kirill joined her. "Is this the Doshk Hilton?" he asked. "I mean, it doesn't look like what I booked over the internet." "Oh, you don't want to stay there. It's full of gangsters selling cars and that sort of thing. You're staying with me. On the top floor is the Kerkomenov family apartment. Come on. We have 5 flights of stairs to climb." It was a large, well-lit apartment with a roof terrace covered in plants overlooking the city. The sitting room was dominated by a large table covered with books and piles of essays from her university students. The walls were decorated with family photographs, beautiful carpets, and the occasional poster. Kirill stopped in front of one in the corridor outside his bedroom. It was advertising a performance in Doshk with Tatiana in Swan Lake, and was the same picture as the one in the programme sent to Villiers. "Do you think it's a shame she stopped dancing so young?" asked Irina. Kirill jumped. He hadn't realized she was watching him. He thought for a moment. "No," he said finally. "I used to think so until I saw her last week. Then I understood that what she really wanted to do was to have a family. And really, that's more important than being a great ballerina." "Yes, I wasn't at all sure about Gilbert at first, and he works too much. But he and the children make her happy." They cooked together and ate on the terrace. The sun was going down behind the mountains surrounding Doshk, and the whole city was covered in a fiery red light. Kirill showed Irina the collection of objects that had been sent to Villiers. She read the article about the nomads. "You know that these people are the Kirkomen nomads, the ones that my family came from originally," she said finally. "Yes, Tanya told me. Could that be the connection to Villiers?" Irina shrugged her shoulders. "I doubt it. I think it's a work thing, not personal." She picked up the bag of earth. "Does Gilbert know where this comes from exactly?" Kirill shook his head. "I remember some time ago, when the Republic first broke away from Russia, there was talk of 7 continents opening a big diamond mine in Kazbakistan. It was out in the desert, near an oasis called Tuv," continued Irina. "The Kirkomen used Tuv as a staging point in their journey across the desert. When I did my research project, they had just started going there again after a gap of a few years. In fact, I think..." She went to her desk and unearthed a notebook full of closely written handwriting. "Let's see... Yes, around this time of year, they head towards the Tuf oasis itself. You should talk to them. Maybe they know something." Kirill felt helpless. "How on earth can I do that? I don't talk their language, and I have no idea where they are even." Irina laughed. "Well, aren't you lucky that you happen to know the world's leading expert on the Kirkomen then? Come on, let's clear away these things. We've got a long drive tomorrow." So, I hope you enjoyed this week's episode. If you did, tell your friends about it, and please rate the story on Apple or Spotify. Just scroll down, tick on the stars, and that will help people to get an idea of what Behind the Bottom Line is like. And if you say something there, that's also very, very helpful. But even better than that, if you write a review on my website, www.behindthebottomline.com, that will encourage people who come to visit the website. Next week in episode 6, Macey has to go to the headquarters of Eco Warriors to report what she's learnt about Nancy Inovix to Roy Marsden, a meeting she's not looking forward to. Meanwhile, Kirill is setting off with Irina to see if they can find the Kirkomen nomads and discover something about the old 7 Continents diamond mine and what was going on there. If you'd like to buy the book or the ebook version of 7 Continents, you can do so by visiting my bookshop on my website www.behindthebottomline.com. There you can also find Peril in Venice, a thriller full of drugs, murder and adventure, set, of course, in Venice, and also a romantic comedy, Double Trouble. Nicholas and Timothy Aldridge, identical twins with very different lifestyles, change places and cause huge amounts of trouble before finding fortune and true love. So until next week, take care and goodbye.